Okay, good morning. Can anyone hear me? Yes, maybe?
Morning.
Good morning. Hi. Um, okay, so put your name in the chat if you're here. If you're not here, don't put your name in. And we'll wait a minute or two before we get started. Let's see. Okay. Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Do we come in on Friday?
No, we do not. We stay home, take care of ourselves, avoid sick people. That's our job.
So I emailed you about what picture you wanted to send.
Yeah, I don't have the
receipt
assignment
photo.
open yet, but I'll have a picture from the third muscle handout, and then I've got to put a little dissection video online, and I'll ask you to take a picture of your dissected sheep brain. So we'll see how to do that. So I'm going to make the video today for dissection, so it should show up later today.
I'm just worried that the items that I have had rotten because it stinks.
Right.
I haven't done anything.
No, it's in a preservative. It smells a bit, but it's not rotting.
Okay.
It's it does have an odor to it, but it's not a decay odor. That's just the preservative odor. So, and I should mention a bunch of things, but okay. So 9 o'clock is here again. Put your name in the chat so that I know you are here. So we're not going to come to lab this week. Lab is at home. You're going to make a cut of the sheep brain. I'll have a little video of that later today. And then I'll have some assignments open. You'll work on exercise 17 in the lab manual. And that's stuff we can do all at home. We won't come in for the lab for the next 3 weeks. The only thing you're ever going to do in the lab again is turn in your dissection tools that you got. Okay, and if you didn't get a lab kit, there are still lab kits available outside my door, N119. So you will have to come to the Highland when it's open, but you can come at any time. They're just sitting on a cart. You can take one, and then you're set. So if you didn't get one, there's still a chance to get one. Okay, so I want to remind you that this Friday, 2 days from now, exam 3 will open. That will cover chapters 12, 13, and 14. So that's divisions of the nervous system, how neurons function, then anatomy and basic functions of the nervous system, or function of regions. And then on 14, that's the somatic nervous system that deals with conscious sensation. So it has sensory organs, and then it also has motor.
Hurry up, Carly, it's 9 o'clock.
Okay, there we go. All right. So this week we are working on the autonomic nervous system, and so I'm going to go over that. So let me see if I can share a little bit of that. It's actually a reasonable chapter. It's not anywhere near as long as the previous 3. So the autonomic nervous system, this is a part of the peripheral nervous system. It's typically considered a part of that, although we're going to talk about corresponding autonomic centers in the central nervous system. So this is a collection of spinal nerves and cranial nerves. And there are 2 divisions to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. And so this is kind of the opposite of the somatic nervous system. Somatic deals with conscious sensations, voluntary movement. It's handled almost entirely by the cerebrum. This stuff is handled in other centers, in the brain, and then it's mostly activity that happens to visceral organs and glands and smooth muscle and cardiac muscles type stuff. And so it's typically you hear a fight or flight response. That's the sympathetic response that prepares us for action. So I've got a guy standing on a fire truck there during an emergency. All right, so let's see if I can get this going here. What did it do? Okay, so the autonomic nervous system is a motor division of the peripheral nervous system and controls visceral activities, glands, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. It's different in anatomy from the somatic motor system in that it's even though it uses cranial nerves and spinal nerves that might be in the somatic motor system, it's a different type of pathway, releases different neurotransmitters, and has a different corresponding control areas in the central nervous system. This is going to coordinate activities at many target organs simultaneously. The two divisions are kind of nicknamed fight or flight for the sympathetic division, or rest and digest for the parasympathetic division. Again, there are nuclei in the central nervous system. The most important ones are in the hypothalamus and in the medulla. And this is closely involved in homeostasis. This is going to control many, many organs that are involved in homeostasis. All right, so let's look at this is a this is a graphic that has tons of information that's hard to get at once. So it shows it's trying to show you the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system in this graphic. On the left side there, in the bottom, there's a blue line that says sympathetic. On the right side there, there's a red arrow that says parasympathetic. So these are the two divisions. Most organs will get innervation from both divisions. So they show the organs in the center, and most of the organs have a line from each side going to them. Okay, sympathetic fibers come from thoracic and lumbar spinal nerves. Okay, parasympathetic fibers come from cranial nerves, okay, three or four of the cranial nerves, and then sacral spinal nerves. So these two divisions arise from different places. In each case, there's two neurons between the central nervous system and the organ. That's unusual. When we talked about somatic systems, it's always just one neuron. One neuron from the eye goes all the way back to the brain, or one neuron from the ear, and then one neuron from the spinal cord goes all the way out to skeletal muscles. So here it's a two neuron system. Okay, and in many cases, that means there's a synapse somewhere, okay, between the first neuron and the second neuron, and this usually occurs in a ganglia, an area where there's a nerve cell body. Okay, so we're just trying to show it, the two different systems here. Okay, the important areas that are controlling autonomic nervous systems, by far the most important one is the hypothalamus. Remember this week we talked about the hypothalamus as a visceral control center involved in temperature regulation, water balance. That's our hunger center. It controls reproductive activities, endocrine activities, lots of behavioral drives. And it's also resetting what happens in organs. And so it's really, really important. And the hypothalamus can be influenced by other centers in the brain, by the cerebrum, by the thalamus, but it's the main control center. Okay, and there's control centers here also shown in the pons and in the medulla. So it shows you some, and there's also some in the midbrain. So there are central nervous system areas around there. Okay. When organs get these dual controls, how do they know what to do? Okay, you have the neurons are coming from different areas, but how does the organ know to do something differently? Well, it turns out that the organs are getting different types of neurotransmitters from different systems. In the parasympathetic system, almost always what's released at the organ is acetylcholine. Okay, so parasympathetic, you should think of acetylcholine. Okay, in sympathetic divisions, usually at the organ, it's releasing epinephrine or norepinephrine. Okay, so different neurotransmitters, and that's why the organs respond differently to these different neurons. Okay, and so the organs will have receptors for both neurotransmitters. Those receptors could be excitatory or inhibitory, and so that it can kind of cause the organ to become more active or less active. So when we talk about the sympathetic division, this is the fight or flight division. You have thoracic spinal nerves and lumbar spinal nerves. There are large ganglia not too far from the spinal cord where there's a synapse between the first neuron and the second neuron. These are called the chain ganglia, or there are even larger collateral ganglia that are kind of midway between the organ and the spinal cord. And usually the first neuron, the neuron that activates the second neuron at the ganglia, that's going to release acetylcholine. But then the neuron at the organ will release norepinephrine. And norepinephrine will cause the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. And so this is going to, norepinephrine will increase heart rate and force of contraction. It will cause the airways to dilate. And so it'll activate certain pathways of smooth muscle. It's going to cause the digestive organs to become less active. So it'll cause smooth muscle there to just kind of relax. It'll cause the kidneys to be less active, and there'll be less blood flow to the kidneys. It will cause the adrenal gland to release adrenaline. And adrenaline is going to further increase heart rate and force of contraction. And it'll also make skeletal muscles more likely to contract. Okay, so I mentioned that the sympathetic connections are in the chain ganglia and in the collateral ganglia. And so these things are located near the spinal cord. You can find them in dissection. They're not too hard to find. And so it's a really distinct form or a distinctive part of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, then the parasympathetic division, that's the rest and digest system. This is the system that comes from cranial nerves and from sacral spinal nerves. And these have a very long first neuron that synapses with a short second neuron that's usually at the site of the organ. And so the ganglia that are found with parasympathetic nerves are usually very small. They're called terminal ganglia. They're very hard to find on dissection. You really, I can't find them, but maybe some people can. With the parasympathetic division, the neurotransmitter released by the first neuron is acetylcholine. The neurotransmitter released by the second neuron is also acetylcholine. However, there's multiple different types of receptors. So acetylcholine could be excitatory or it could be inhibitory. And so the effect depends upon what's going on at the organ, what receptors there. And so here it shows the innervation going to the organs. Typically, the parasympathetic division revs up digestion. It revs up urine production. It reduces breathing rate. It reduces blood pressure. It produces visceral responses, and you have activation going on the whole time. But parasympathetic division really kicks in like after a big meal. So, like after Thanksgiving, here are these two guys there, sit down, eat a big meal on Thanksgiving, turn on a movie, and boom. Their digestive system's going really hard. It makes them sleepy, reduces their blood pressure. They're going to be ready to digest and process that food and do a lot of visceral activities. And so that's the kind of thing it makes you do. The parasympathetic has the autonomic control areas that are in the parasympathetic system are very often in the brainstem. There's lots of these in the midbrain, lots of these in the medulla and in pons. The vagus nerve is a very big parasympathetic nerve that's going to go to many, many of the visceral organs and carry lots of these fibers. And so really, really important. So when we compare the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions, we can talk about the preganglionic cell body, where it's located. There's differences there, different parts of the spinal cord, where these nerves arise, whether they're spinal nerves coming from thoracic or lumbar regions, or they're cranial nerves, and then sacral spinal nerves, where the ganglia are located, okay, the size of the ganglia, the number of postganglionic neurons for each preganglionic neurons. I didn't talk much about this, but the sympathetic division, there's a lot of divergence, which means that one neuron goes out and it might activate many organs and send things to many different structures. And so then the length of the first neuron is short in the sympathetic division, and then the second neuron has a longer neuron, and it's just the opposite in the parasympathetic. Okay. Again, the key thing here is what's being released and what receptors are present on the organ. So in acetylcholine, there's two types of receptors. Nicotinic receptors are excitatory, and then muscarinic receptors can be linked to excitatory or inhibitory stuff. And so you can have acetylcholine at the organ kind of inhibiting or exciting the organ into action. And so nicotinic receptors are very, very common. These, they call them nicotinic because not only do they respond to acetylcholine, but when they were studying the receptors, they realized the receptor binds to nicotine. And this is why smoking has such a powerful effect. And it's does so many things to the body. It elevates blood pressure and heart rate because it's exciting these nicotinic receptors, and it changes what's going on in digestion as well. Then for norepinephrine and epinephrine, again, there's two types of receptors, alpha and beta receptors. And again, these can be excitatory or inhibitory. Okay, so we have these general responses for autonomic activities. These are visceral activities that control homeostasis. We can up or down regulate them by these general responses. And I should point out that sympathetic response, the fight or flight response, we use that when we see danger. Okay, so like the example I used was seeing the sight and sound of a bear. That's causing a sympathetic response. It'll cause your heart to beat hard. You'll feel it pound in your chest. You'll be ready to run. You'll have tunnel vision. Your pupils will dilate, and all sorts of things will happen. And this will cause a huge release of adrenaline, and you'll be ready to run. Okay. The bad thing about sympathetic responses is they're good in the short term. They prepare you to fight danger. But sometimes in the long term, they can be relatively bad responses, and they can happen at times when they're not useful. This is what we call stress. Okay. When people feel stressed, often it's for specific reasons, like they have a task to complete but not enough time, or they have anxiety about a social situation or an upcoming, any upcoming event, or particular anger or interpersonal conflict. These can all increase sympathetic activity. Okay, and so that gets you ready to fight or to run away. But often when we're talking about these things in modern life, fighting or running away doesn't help. And so like when there's an upcoming test and you realize, I forgot about this and I've only got 24 hours, that's going to cause a sympathetic response. Your heart rate will go up, your blood pressure will go up, it'll change the amount of sugar in your blood, the amount of fat in your blood, it'll drive your hunger mechanism, it will interfere with digestion and urine processing. And that really doesn't help you at all in studying for a test. It doesn't help you at all planning what are you going to do or think about what are the options for you to do. And in fact, a lot of that stress has really negative long-term consequences. If you go months over time and you constantly have this sympathetic response, like say you have a boss that's really difficult, that's going to elevate your blood pressure. It'll give you chronically elevated blood pressure. It can cause hypertension. The change in glucose in your blood, the change in fats in your blood can cause atherosclerosis, heart disease. It can cause diabetes. These are really chronic problems that can be triggered by this sympathetic response being activated too often. And so there are ways to kind of alter how your organs function by reducing stress. And these are typical activities people have done, things like meditation and prayer, but also exercise, humor. You know, I always put down here physical touch, and that's that can help release stress. Having toddlers sit on your lap and just playing with them, dogs, cats. If you like those animals, those can be very helpful and can reduce that. And so it's not frivolous. It can be an important component of health, is to try and relieve stress, because that will change your autonomic function. It can really help you with blood pressure, can help prevent things like heart disease, hypertension, stroke, really major problems for Americans. Okay. So this has just got the differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic, talks about what goes on there. These are important regulators of our autonomic, our visceral activities, what our organs are doing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Has anyone heard any of this before? Maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Would this be on the exam?
This will be on the final exam, but not exam 3.
Okay, so we only have exam 3 and then the final exam?
And then the final. Yeah. So for exam 3, there are the essay questions available in this week's box. There is a practice test available in this week's box. I will post the key on Friday. Okay. And then there's a review, a PowerPoint review. So you can access the PowerPoint, and then there's a little narrated version of it. So those things are available for you. So in many ways, exam 3 is kind of the three of the hardest chapters. We've really upped our game here. We've been going at about the same pace, about a chapter a week, but we're getting to harder and harder chapters. Okay, and so 12 and 13, and particularly 12 and 13, I think are really hard. 14, you know, and I should point out in chapter 14, I'm not going to ask you the motor pathways. I'm not going to ask you about the sensory pathways, other than you should be able to tell me which cranial nerve goes from the eye, which cranial nerve goes from the ear. That's as far, but the nerve pathways in the brain, like the extrapyramidal tract or those tracts, I'm not going to ask you those. Those are details you might have to memorize if you wound up, you know, in neurology, studying nerves and nervous system problems. But for us, it's just to know that there are pathways, that they're mapped out. That's kind of where we're at with that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So we get an hour to do this exam, or an hour and 15?
An hour.
Okay. Because I ran out of time last night.
Okay. You know, if you, it can help you if you're, look at the old questions for your quizzes, study your old quizzes, look at those. I'm reusing some of those questions, and even the questions that I have that weren't on those quizzes, I'm asking similar things. Read over the chapter reviews. That's a good way to study right before them, the chapter reviews. Look at terminology. Terminology is a big thing. So if you know that those lists of words from the hints at the beginning of the chapter, that's really helpful. A lot of this is just knowing what the words mean. And so look those things over. Again, flashcards are helpful. Writing things out is better than just staring at them. And so you wanna use active methods. Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
I just wanted to clarify. So we're not having another lab exam anymore, right?
I'm
Or is it
sorry.
still too early?
No, we won't have a lab exam.
Okay.
If anything, I would give you an online quiz or something like that. But we won't come in for a lab exam. The COVID cases are too high, and that's something that's going to go down very slowly. And so, this is a time when I don't want you guys to be on campus. And, I don't know what your other classes are doing, but I feel like it's probably not safe. I mean, particularly with the lab exam, because we all have to use the same thing and we're moving around. It's very hard to stay 6 feet apart.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Make sure your name's in the chat. If you came in late, put your name in there so that I've got a record of you being here.
Okay,
Go ahead, Lucretia.
Since we're not having any lab exam anymore, would we be able to get those points elsewhere or no?
They just, those points will not appear on your grade. I will probably give you some extra points as far as quizzes go and assignments. So there might be some extra stuff there, but I won't just give you 100 points. Sorry.
I know that. I know that, but I was maybe thinking we could do something else for those 100 points or something. I don't know, because I'm trying to get my grade up.
Every time I give you an assignment, that's like 3 hours for me.
Oh.
Well, some of the files I have a hard time opening. Send JPEGs. I can open JPEGs easy. or some people are dumping their pictures into a Word file. That's easy for me to open. But there's, if your phone is, there are a bunch of different file formats that I've got what is this? A Hewlett Packard, and my Hewlett Packard just doesn't open some of the file formats very well. And they gave me a file converter, and now I need another one because it just doesn't work. So I'm plowing through the assignments, but for some of you, I'm still stuck because I can't open your files. So sorry. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say goodbye. Again, if you have any questions, you can text me. The exam will open Friday, like at 1, and it'll close Saturday night. Okay. So make sure you spend some time studying before then, and study in 10 to 15-minute periods with a break between them. Okay. All right. Again, see you later. Good luck. Watch for the dissection video coming up. It'll be a great one.